Welcome back to the Horizons Review. Cody and I are here today, and we're discussing a novel for the first time. We're discussing Ernst Junger's The Glass Bees. So, why did I choose to discuss a novel instead of our usual work of philosophy or theology? The answer is I think Glass Bees is two things. It's a great novel, like it really does read well. It's tightly plotted around one central action, but it's also a very prophetic meditation on our relationship with technology as it changed throughout the 20th century, and as Junger saw it changing in the future as well. Um, so, Cody, this was your first time reading the book, right?
It's my first time reading the book, not my first time reading Younger.
Yeah. What did you think? Just giving your first impressions really quickly.
Yeah, kind of a couple things really came to mind. One is that I once read that Younger's novels were not very good because he was better as a diarist. So his book Storm and Steel, right? He very famously rewrote something like 6 to 8 times. If you're talking about the book with someone, you basically have to ask them what edition of the book are you reading to even know if you're talking about the same book. Uh, and so this was my first introduction to him talking about fiction. And what was really interesting about it is that Junger as diarist still comes out very strongly in it. His experiences from the First World War, which he experienced and seemed to have enjoyed, are very much present in it. Um, his own perspective on what's happening in German society around him or European society in general is all there, and industrialization, right? At some point, he's talking about working in a tank factory versus when he was a cavalryman,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which again,
Yeah. Yeah, they're interesting things. So the novel is all narrated by one person, this Captain Ricard, and his biography overlaps with Junger's in a number of significant ways, but it also departs in a number of significant ways as well. And the book intentionally takes place both in the real world and in something rather different. Like it's never clearly stated what country Captain Ricard is from. Some events there's reference to there having been an era of the world wars, and there's some sort of peace in between them. There's something that where they refer to as the Asturian Civil War, which is very clearly meant to be the Spanish Civil War, but
yeah,
never actually called that. Um, like there's a moment where he recalls because he's supposed to have served in that, which is a difference from Junger's own biography, and he recalls having seen two monks' corpses hung up in a butcher's shop. And
hmm
that's the sort of scenery that would be familiar to someone who's read about the Spanish Civil War. That
yeah,
is clearly what he's referencing there, but there's also like it never clearly says, oh, I'm talking about Germany, or I'm talking about myself. Even like once again, he's Ricard is a cavalry officer who went to the military academy. He has a quite different initial biography from Junger, but there are other things like he's kind of an aesthete. He has this like moral sensibility, but also almost cowardice, that leads him to make these compromising decisions, that he talks about throughout the novel. In some ways, there's an element to this novel where it's almost Junger's moral assessment of himself feels like
yeah.
it's coming out. Um, which actually, but I think that brings us to the first question I really wanted to discuss, though, was what type of book is this? Because it's normally pitched as being a science fiction novel,
Barely.
and I don't think it's a science fiction novel at all.
I mean, it's
Um,
barely a novel. I
yeah,
mean,
I think it's something more like a fable.
mhm.
It's part fable, it's part memoir. There's all
Again, it
this other
writes like
stuff
a
going
diary.
on. Yeah, and there's this reason why I say it's a fable because the central technology of the book are these robots produced by a man named Zapparoni, and Zapparoni's robots. are this like fantastical technology from far in the future. Like they occur in miniature. They're able to sort the pollen out of the air. They've replaced human actors in the movies. They do all these wonderful things that is far out of the reach of the technology of Junger's era. But at the same time, this it's very clearly someone reacting who's born in the late 19th century, lived through the world wars. Like there's this fantastical element, almost as if not just someone from that era was ported into the far future, but almost as if like that entire civilization was
Yeah.
transported into the far future. But it isn't even meant to be, I think, taken entirely literally. For example, there's a passage in the book where he talks about some of the things the robots can do, and one of them is that they're able to build as well. So they've replaced normal builders. And he says, with all their enormous potentialities, they could, of course, build cities, but not the smallest dwelling of the kind once built by a simple mason or carpenter. Certain
Hmm.
naive souls even commissioned them to build churches, though one would not want even a garden pavilion as a gift from them. The churches they got were built in a style only suitable for pillboxes, airplanes, and refrigerators. They celebrated their religious rites before a congregation that considered penicillin more effective than any sacrifice of the Mass. And he's clearly talking there about already what we would think of as the normal mode of construction
Yeah.
in our time. Like he's clearly thinking of cheap framed construction as opposed to masonry and lumber, brick, these sort of more firm substances. Like he's already talking about this, but then he's also saying like, well, that's actually reflective of some sort of spiritual condition as well. If you're willing to have like these um, cheap buildings thrown up for your church, it sort of shows that your faith is more in technology than it is in the faith itself. And it's these
Yeah.
elements that make me say, yeah, it's not really science fiction. There's something else going on here. It's more of a fable. It's more of a critique.
Yeah, it connects in a few ways. One of the themes is that not only can these automatons or these glass bees, these robots, and so forth, do what nature does, but in many instances, he says, does so better.
Yeah,
Such that actually the glass bees, which are certain forms of the automatons that take up several chapters in the novel, him just describing how they're moving about and how they're interacting with the flowers and producing pollen and honey. He says in many ways they're superior to normal bees.
yeah.
Uh,
But
and
importantly,
I
they don't interact with the pollen.
yeah,
Yeah, he notes. He notes that they aren't going to be able to fertilize the flowers. They're simply just going to outcompete the
they're
bees.
extractors. Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah. I quite liked what you're saying about this relationship to technology. One thing is that right now I saw on Twitter the other day this person was like, "Oh, we're now making automated stone fabrication so that we can have nice stoneworks all over the United States, just as we had like in the 19th and the 18th centuries." And you look at it, and it feels very soulless. I mean, there's an example of this right now. These I think they're Benedictine monks in Wyoming are reconstructing a monastery from scratch using CNC machines.
yeah,
And unfortunately, when you look at it, it it has all the things that a monastery would have, but I'm just not filled with the awe. Right?
yeah.
It wasn't constructed by human hands or with human tools in a way that uh, it comes out in the aesthetics as well.
Yeah, it looks like an architectural rendering
Yeah,
almost, like something that
yeah.
you would get from the architect is like this is our computer generated rendering of what this building is going to look like. It kind of has that sort of feel to it.
It's my
Um,
Minecraft version of the
yeah,
St. Peter's Basilica.
Yeah, something that's very funny that people who are well read in philosophy often say when they read the Glass Bees is they go, "Oh, this like sounds this feels like kind of familiar to me. Like this feels like Heidegger's question concerning technology."
It is,
Um,
right?
yeah,
Didn't
but
Heidegger
there's
read?
something funny that goes on there. The influence is actually in the other direction.
Yeah, Heidegger
Uh,
read his earlier
yeah,
book, The Worker. Yeah.
yeah. Is that Heidegger read the Worker, which was a long essay that Junger had written back in the 30s, and it is known by scholars now that yeah, that's conclusive. Is that that
Mm-hmm.
played a very big role in Heidegger's own conception of the
Mm-hmm.
relationship of people to technology. Um, because there is like I referred to this at the end of the last episode. I was like, it's Junger's prophecy of a technological panopticon, but and it's like it's not really it's not immediately evident on reading the book why I would use the word panopticon. I mean, like there is this element in which the robots are so permeate human existence that you're probably always being observed by one of
Yeah.
Zapparoni's creations at all time. But it's even deeper than that because the pervasiveness of Zapparoni's creations has created a world in which most human beings now see things as if they are a robot.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's not an invasion of privacy per se. That's the
yeah,
issue. It's the
yeah,
invasion of technology um, as a defining feature of human life that seems to be
yeah,
the problem for Younger.
yeah.
It's
There's
it's
another.
interesting. Not only are the bees better at uh, extracting pollen than actual bees, but he also talks about these. Uh, you think about AI, right? He talks about these humanoid robots that they use in plays and such, to the point where people they're almost more perfect than human,
Yeah,
uh, and people are like committing suicide over it because these
yeah,
things are so perfect, and it's reconstructing the human image for them
yeah,
in such an unrealistic way.
yeah. It is interesting that the model for Zapparoni as a personality, I've never been able to see anyone like I'm sure there's some scholarship out there that's made this point because to me it's painfully obvious in a few different passages. The model for Zapparoni, at least one of the models for him, is actually Walt Disney.
Oh, okay.
Um, and
I
this
didn't
comes
know. That
out
makes a
very
lot of sense.
yeah, so this comes out very clearly. There's a passage where he talks about Zapparoni creates this image for himself as the kindly grandfather who just wants to
Right.
make children happy with his inventions, um, and is fascinated by um, the idea of replacing mechanical actors, replacing real actors with mechanical ones. And he even goes as far as like, and adults sometimes worry about the effect of his works on children, but you just sort of resign yourself to it and
Hmm.
go about your day. And these are all both these are elements close to Disney himself, and then or how people reacted to him. It is kind of interesting. It is almost as if uh, Junger had read about Disneyland and was like,
I
ah, yes,
know.
and then did some inversions too, because the inversion here is whereas Disney tried to recreate in some ways the pre-technological point of view in building Disneyland. So like if you go to Disneyland, the first thing you do is you're opened up onto this beautiful like post beautiful Edwardian American town center. And then from there you're taken into these realms of fantasy and science fiction, and it's supposed to be sort of a better than real life, but it's using technology in this way to try to like remove you from the world where technology is the
Yeah.
point of view. Whereas there's this sinister inversion of it in how Zapparoni works. Where Zapparoni does isolate himself from technology, like he talks about, this is the man who does everything mechanically, but he comes into his house and everything is like wood and there are books stacked around. And it's like clear that
Candles.
the robots themselves don't really intrude on Zapparoni's sanctum. And there's this beautiful garden. It's built around a Cistercian monastery, ruined Cistercian monastery. So he's sort of like existing on the skeleton of the previous civilization, and feeding from it. Like he sees, in some ways, is still subsisting on this earlier element. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there are other elements to him as well. There's a sinister element that makes him more like Sam Altman, maybe. Uh,
Hmm.
there, he's a complex character, and we can talk to. I think I don't want to talk about this right now, but I think this also ties back into the novel's very strange and ambiguous ending as
Yeah.
well. Um, so I wanted to talk a bit though, now that we sort of like set up the feeling of like what type of book this is, a little bit about Junger's biography, for
Yeah.
people who are not familiar with him. Um, so he was born to like a relatively well-to-do upper middle class family. He involved himself in his youth with this sort of German back to nature anti-technological movement. So this was not
He's like a
a
hippie. Yeah.
this was not a new phase in his character. Um, he serves in World War One. Famously writes the memoir "Storm of Steel" about his experiences during that war.
And how great it was.
Yeah, and he spends the interwar years, more as a literary figure, but he also is part of the what you could say is the conservative revolutionary aspect of Weimar politics. Um, his
He's a
relationship,
conservative humanist, if you could
yeah,
categorize him some way.
his relationship with the Nazi Party is very complicated. It's not like Heidegger, where, for example, he went through a period where he was a very, very strong booster of them, but he always had this element, like he had this element, especially early on, of like perhaps seeing them as the lesser evil. But by the later 1930s, he writes this novel on Marble Cliffs,
Hmm.
which is very clearly an anti-Nazi novel. There are also anti-Soviet elements in it as well, but it is unambiguously a critique of totalitarian government and how it impinges on the individual.
Hmm.
Um, and the interesting thing is, he actually manages to get this book published. And so the general story about this is, I don't know how true this is. Like, I've never read a great source for it. Is that Goebbels wanted the book to be censored and refused to publish it. But Hitler, being a big fan of Junger's in general, personally intervened and allowed the book to be published,
I see.
in
Well,
spite of
from my
the, yeah,
understanding, he was because he was very much injured in the First World War, and
yeah,
talks about these injuries. And in World War II, I think he joins the German army, and they effectively give him this like cozy post in Paris,
yeah,
where he just like hangs out with other intellectuals, talking about books and
yeah.
literature.
He basically, like, he used his position in Paris to mostly hang out with the French intellectuals who remained in Paris, and to have like various affairs. It seems like, yeah, there's a scene in the Glass Bees where Ricard recalls like, um, walking through Montmartre, and someone like gestures and he can't resist, even though he knows like the
Right.
guy is like selling his sister as a prostitute. And you wonder if that is actually an incident from Junger's time,
Yeah, I
during the
mean,
Second
again, if
World
you think
War.
about him as a diarist, he's really writing very phenomenologically, just expressing his experience in many
Yeah,
ways, right? He's like, oh, I always for whatever reason, even though I'm not a CD guy, I was always attracted to CD joints, and something about
Yeah,
that
like
always gave me a kick.
yeah, he has this line where he's like, "Well, the reason I was able to like indulge in all these things is because I wasn't really attracted to them, so I couldn't get addicted or
Yeah.
sucked in by them." Um, so actually, to place the glass bees in position, like I think this is something we probably should have established earlier, is that it was published in 1957.
It's
So it
very
is,
early. Yeah.
yeah, so it isn't that terribly long after the war. Um, and it's also well before a lot of like it's well before the space race really kicks into high gear. Uh, that's one thing that's very notable versus other like actual science fiction from this age is there's no sense of space exploration as a topic
hmm
in
Yeah.
this book, which is very relevant to us today where we're sitting in 2025 and in space exploration. Elon's dreams of going to Mars aside is like not an ongoing concern. It certainly doesn't shape how we live our lives. I mean, space shapes how we live our lives. Like the importance of satellites is hard to overstate
Yeah.
in modern civilization. But the idea of humans having like this relationship to space has definitely receded into the background.
Well, it's interesting when you think about what, a lot of people say that the book is very prophetic. And I think part of the reason why it's prophetic is because it does have stripped away from his vision of technology certain things that we focus on today. So, one is space. Another one is that, like the concept of like a neural network or something that is mimicking human behavior in some way is not necessarily there. You're not questioning necessarily what it means to be human.
So we had a bit of a technical snafu, and I'll let Cody continue his point he was trying to make.
Yeah, so the fact that certain things that we take for granted in technology being stripped away today, I think helped make the book as seemingly prophetic as it is, right? So you're not necessarily thinking about space or like AI mimicking human cognition or anything like that. It is stripped bare. Uh, it's stripped bare, and what you see is basically just the pervasiveness of technology in general human life, not necessarily asking some of the questions that science fiction today would ask. And so, for that reason, its premise and the questions that he's dealing with are very general.
Yeah.
Just what is the relationship between man and technology? What is the difference between something that we make ourselves and something that we make that's completely augmented? It reminds me a lot of, and I kept reading this. One of my favorite philosophers was Ivan Illich. I don't know. Uh, yeah, so he wrote the book Tools for Conviviality, where he also wrote very extensively on humankind's relationship to technology. And he says, things like hand tools um, give at least someone some connection to the thing that they're building. And we're continuously building tools that isolate us uh, from the things that we produce in a way. He makes this whole like political critique that's about the means of production, but not in the way that a Marxist or capitalist would necessarily talk about it, but in terms of its isolating effects on the person as technology continues to grow, and how it kind of pulls the human out of the picture. And that I feel like that's really Junger's thesis here.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
the closest thing I think there is to a very clear like thesis statement, if you can say that a novel would ever have one in the book, is he has this line. He says, "Human perfection and technical perfection are incompatible. If we strive for
mhm.
one, we must sacrifice the other. There is, in any case, a parting of the ways. Whoever realizes this will do cleaner work one way or the other."
Yeah. Yeah, you either disregard the human entirely and you make better technology, or you disregard that technological development and
Yeah,
you focus on the humans, right?
yeah. So a lot of this novel is told in flashback. It's flashback to Ricard's days in the military academy. There's flashbacks, extensive flashbacks to the interwar experience. And I wanted,
His
yeah,
childhood.
his childhood as well. There's one of the flashbacks though that's very strange and worth discussing. So he's discussing the interwar period, and you get this impression that Ricard's involved in like some sort of like Freikorps like organization or something where they're at least going around and like roughing up people and doing some other
Yeah.
stuff. But then you have this element where they're also meeting at the flat of a former army comrade of his who's like taken on this utopian vision. He's like, we're going to get rid of all the machines. We're going to go back to plowing the land. We'll redistribute everything to everyone. And, we'll have a nation of small holder, like yeomen, uh, very grandiose vision of like both opposing technology and then uh, reworking all of society around this opposition. But this guy is not a hero of the novel.
Yeah.
He's in it like you would think like, oh, like this is a novel that's very pessimistic about technology, but no, he's like this absurdist figure in the end. And so eventually they come up to his apartment one evening and he's raving. And but they're like it would be like he was drunk except he was a teetotaler. And then he at the end of his rant he says, long live, and Junger writes, and I will not print the name, and throws himself from the window. Um, so there's a couple things about that paragraph that I think about. It's like, one is, okay, what's the name that he said? And I
Yeah.
think it's obviously Hitler. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it is like, oh, this is where these people got led to, like these intense reactionaries, even though there was nothing about Hitler himself that would have thought that, oh, he's going to like redistribute people, like create this pre-technological society. But there are elements of that in Nazi propaganda, such that you can see why this character would become attracted to.
Well, there's elements of like there's I dare say like a humanist tradition in almost at least towards like the German folk and German culture,
Yeah,
right? In Hitler's philosophy, um, it wasn't one based purely off capital
yeah.
or technological gains or something like
Yeah,
that.
so there is this element though where Junger is saying, yeah, you can take this humanist element though to its own kind of absurdity um, in this particular flashback. Um, but yeah, like I've never seen that scene discussed. Like I haven't read a ton of the secondary literature on this book. I've only read a few things, and I'm sure someone has discussed this particular incident. But it does seem clear to me that I think that the name that he will not print is that of Hitler.
Yeah, the guy also says something else that's interesting that's brought up in a later chapter when he's thinking again about his friend who jumped out the
Yeah,
window. And they're saying to him, they're like, well, how are you even going to make this society happen? And before he jumps out the window, he says something like, it's easy. I'll show you.
yeah, yeah,
And he casts himself out the window and it's like this like reverse Camus. It's like, oh, to be human, you have to kill yourself.
yeah.
Uh, you have to seize the reins and do something this tragic. Which is like, there's like some defeatism in there, which
Yeah,
the main character talks about himself as a defeatist quite constantly.
yeah.
Um,
I thought it was interesting too. Like even back in 1957, like he's anticipating the growth of a lot of modern anxieties, which wouldn't really blossom until the next
yeah,
decade, and in some ways, like didn't really take root as a cultural force until much more recently. He's talking about Zapparoni's house and like, oh, there's this wonderful garden, and that means also that he can get garden produce on his table. And he goes, "Hear the saying that words have changed is still valid, since bread is no longer bread and wine is no longer wine. They are doubtful
Oh,
chemicals.
chemicals.
Yeah, at present, one really has to be unusually rich to avoid being poisoned." Yeah, that's for all the seed oil bros out
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's just like this interesting anticipation of how cultural anxieties around technology um,
Hmm.
would develop. Um, I actually made a tweet about this somewhat recently, where I was talking about um, in in Adorno, like he has this line in Minimia Moralia where he's like, he just refers in passing to Jung as being an arch reactionary. And
Hmm.
when I first read that back when I was in my late teens, I was kind of confused. It was like, what makes, like, I didn't really know Jung that well, but I did know like people who were into him. And they were all
You
hippies.
would think about him as a
Yeah,
traditionalist, or
they were
yeah,
all
yeah,
hippies, and I was like, yeah, like, okay, why is this guy that all these hippies love like an arch reactionary? Because I hadn't quite realized at that point in my life that despite having liberal politics, hippies themselves are a kind of arch reactionary.
right.
Um, and there's it's no accident that um, these particular works of Junger's like continue to have a lot of pull for people on the political left, but I think who have like these otherwise reactionary sympathies in regards to um, technology, and we see that even today, where it's on the political left where there's the strongest reactionary sentiment in many ways towards AI.
Right. Yeah,
There's
it's
like
very left
much
wing.
more purity policing about AI on the left than there is on the right. Um, there's much more catastrophic thinking about it on the right in terms of catastrophic about the technology itself. Like there's not like these like story scarcity stories like AI is going to suck up all the water or AI is going to eat all the energy on the right. Like on the right, there just seems to be more of this like dreary pessimism about AI. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm not even going to mention like kill everyone ist peoples because I just don't think they're like significant enough in number or like easy enough to take seriously as a group.
Yeah. Also, not easy to place
Yeah,
on any ideological spectrum.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if you, yeah, like you said, you think about the hippies, and if just you were just brought to Earth and you learn about your standard American Republican and Democrat, and you heard the term "back to the land," immediately you would associate that with like a right wing
yeah,
uh, figure, but it's not. This is like not at all right wing sentiment. Yeah, similarly, um, this case about AI and purity, right? They have a very aesthetic revulsion to the
yeah,
idea that, oh, well, you're stealing from the artists, and actually, this is something we should leave to people, and so on. Very reactionary against
yeah,
technology. Um,
yeah. I mean, like, and I don't exactly agree with the stealing from the artist critique of AI, but I
yeah,
100% agree that there is a loss when you take away things that could be done by an independent human artisan and push it off to AI.
yeah,
But that leaves all these like weird corner cases. Like, okay, but like, what if you could not possibly afford to get a human hands to do this? Like, is it then okay to enlist
right.
AI? I don't know. I mean, I kind of think yes, but I also feel like, well, is that a self-serving yes or not? Um, yeah,
Yeah, but even, but we were just talking a little while ago about, this using like automated manufacturing to make like stone buildings and such, and how gross it is, right? I think a lot about it reminds me very deeply of Charles Sanders Peirce's ideas in this essay, Evolutionary Love, where he says, if there's any proof of my theory that evolution has this like developmental trajectory towards certain kinds of growth, it should be shown in that there is a so-called spirit of the times. He says, if I'm right, it should be the case that if someone were to make a medieval cathedral in New York City today, if I were to walk into it, uh, I wouldn't feel anything from it in the same way that I would in a modern cathedral, right? And so I think that there's kind of a middle ground here, which is that human labor in certain endeavors matters a lot, but it's also using the tools available to enhance uh, the human experience, right? So there's a difference between using the new technologies to automate the old and using them to construct kind of an aesthetic new.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I mean, in Zapparoni's case, right, he's just replacing what was already there,
Yeah.
um, using what was already known. Or in the case of these, like CNC machine monks, uh, they're just making old stuff instead of actually uh, doing something radically new with these new forms of technology.
Yeah. Yeah, there's another interesting prophetic element too that I wanted to talk about that though also like gets wrapped up in this general critique of technology where there's this scene where he believes that Zapparoni is judging him for having been a soldier, a
Mm-hmm.
cavalryman, like someone who's done morally dubious things in service of his country. But then he has this side where he goes, well, horsemen have existed for thousands of years, and the world has continued to exist in spite of Genghis Khan and other gentlemen who came and went like the tides. But when saints like
Yeah.
Zapparoni began to appear, the earth itself was threatened. The peaceful stillness of the forests, the depths of the ocean, the outermost part of the earth's atmosphere were in danger. And to like put this in place, this is about 20 years before they discovered a hole in the ozone layer.
Yeah.
you know, like he is like foreseeing like this general environmental exploitation that happened throughout the post-war 20th century. But there's also the element where we did find the technical means to avoid a lot of that.
Yeah.
Forest cover has increased since the 1970s. Like in some ways, Junger lived to see the worst of it, but not in that sense, like in the purely environmental sense. Like he lived to see the worst of it, but not any sort of way in which the technological mode would actually like lead in some sense to recovery. But it's not the same thing. We've lost the old growth. Like we now have all this wonderful new growth everywhere, but it's going to be hundreds, thousands of years before we ever get back exactly what we tore out.
But what's really interesting about that section of the passage too, though, is like even if it's the case that you could mitigate the environmental degradation. Uh, Part of what Junger seems to be saying there is that he's offended by the fact that Zapparoni and figures like him, you can think about people
Yeah,
in tech now, uh, posit themselves as saints.
yeah,
Like he's almost saying that Genghis Khan, by being a nasty dictator and acting the way he is and being honest about who he was less gross than people who do harms with technologies in the name of
yeah,
good. Or they all take on this almost like saintly uh, vision of themselves. Oh yeah, we're fixing things, making the world better, so on and so forth.
yeah,
When really he's like, no, just say what you're actually doing. You're trying to make money, or you're trying to, exhibit technological control in this section of the economy. He's like, if it was like that, uh, you could almost like the people,
yeah,
or at least not hate them. But these people arrive on the scene as saints.
yeah,
They cause all this destruction, and then they have no accountability.
yeah. It is interesting because he doesn't like it's never a purely catastrophic view. Like there's nothing
Yeah,
in the novel, like he doesn't deny the great benefits that Zapparoni's inventions have brought to people. He's like,
Yeah.
oh, it makes it so much easier to keep house now, or the pollen separating robots have made it possible for like, his cousin or something who has debilitating hay fever to not have to retreat to the mountains every summer. Um, and these other things, like the idea that the technology has upsides is not removed
Mhm.
from the novel. I think the important thing is it is the idea that it's the technical point of view, is that you can't escape the things that are mediated by the new technology. um, what is hard to do, I think, in the book is to separate to the idea of like what made the old technology different. And there is something of a thesis in there. It's like, well, it's because of the work of individual artisans. But then he's also very, very careful to note that all of Zapparoni's robots are made by individual artisans with the
Yeah.
temperament
Yeah.
of artisans. And they're difficult to deal with, and so on and so forth. Like they truly are artists and not just technicians. And he also, um, some people might think, oh, this is like a lack of vision, but I do think it serves the specific purpose in the novel. Like he's very clear. He's like, there's no robots that can build robots. Like they have to be built by these artisan technicians. But then I think it's like the only thing that's then left is like, well, there's this intervening layer between the artisan and the result. It's like because the you
Yeah.
as a person living in this world, like you're never really admiring, except maybe as they exist in the movies, you're not admiring Zapparoni's creations as works of art in themselves. Like they might be made by artisans, but they're out there doing work. They're in factories,
Yeah.
they're in your home, they're building buildings. Um, so they now stand in, the robots themselves are now the artisans. So we have artisans who've created artisans, but there's like, um, this level of remove means that the technical rather than the artistic point of view dominates. And so, what are these other points of view? Because I do think this is difficult for us now, is that the technical point of view does dominate for us today. It's, most people, like most educated people would agree, it's like, oh, well, what are the results from your non-technical point of view? How do you,
Yeah.
how can you say that these other, um, meaning building enterprises like actually improve human life? Because I can point to the technical point of view and say, um, all these new strains of wheat developed at the University of Nebraska have
Yeah.
resulted in destroying world hunger and leading to millions of new lives. What has, what have poetry and religion done that measures up to that? And these are questions that the book, I think, is very well aware of, which is why it has, this strange, very strange ending to it, which I think it's worth discussing. Um, so this is the part where I say, like, I don't really believe in spoilers. If you've
There's like barely a spoiler
Yeah,
to give
except
here.
this is the one event that is almost a spoiler in the book. It is the very, very end of it. So the setup here is that Ricard has been offered a job by Zapparoni, and the job is very clearly morally dubious in some sense. It sounds like what Zapparoni is looking for is a man who will go out and intimidate, possibly assassinate former workers of his who have tried to leave the company. And he sets up this tableau for Ricard in his gardens. where Ricard finds a pool full of severed ears. And he thinks through it, realizes that the ears must be artificial, fishes one out, examines it. It is artificial. And then, in sort of a brief moment of fury, he destroys one of the robots. And Zapparoni reappears and tells him, basically, you failed the test. Like, you don't have the fortitude to do what I need you to do. But however, he gives him another job, one that requires fine ethical judgment.
Yeah.
He's going to settle disputes between Zapparoni's artists in the future, because he's able to see everyone's point of view. Because there's actually a moment earlier in the novel where he talks about, oh, your old comrade in arms said that people would wave the white flag on the other side and then open fire on you as you like advanced under the idea that they had surrendered. What do you have to say about that? And Ricard goes, well, it's like basically it's like the other guys in the trenches. There are some of them that have lost their nerve and are ready to surrender, and there's some of them who won't surrender under any conditions. So there's like this confusion where some people are trying to surrender and some are still shooting, and this is the sort of thing that happens under wartime conditions. And Zapparoni is like, well, like, isn't it just easier to say that they had tricked you and drew you into this situation and to condemn the enemy in this way? And you do get the, he keeps coming back to this idea. He's like, oh, that I have like this certain moral sensibility that like keeps on drawing me into trouble, even as I do like these otherwise seedy things. But the question about this ending, because it is a weird ending, it almost is saying something about the continued use of the human, even in the technical society, but it becomes like so restricted in space. It's like this elite like Zapparoni still has space to need someone who can exercise these older non-technical skills. But everyone else just kind of lives under the thumb of Zapparoni's technology in the world that they have shaped. It's only Zapparoni that gets to escape and like have this beautiful garden and otherwise like have these normal human concerns, like him and his artisans. And so that way he's able to use Ricard, whereas Ricard, is otherwise unemployed and finds difficulty finding employment.
Yeah.
So
part of the ending, I think, chimes in with he talks about how Ricard constantly says, "Oh, I'm a defeatist, and I just think everything's bad, and things don't really end well, And several times he said, "Oh, I'm not going to take this job, even if the guy offers it to me." And like the chapter before the ending chapter, he's like, "So I didn't take the job." And then the last chapter starts with, "I was offered the job and I took it."
Yeah.
And you're sitting there, you're like, "Wait, what?" But it's him saying like, "Yeah, I fell into my defeatism once again, and I realized like I have to live in this world anyway. So I'll go ahead and take the job, and actually it'll be nice, and I'll buy my wife a nice dress."
Yeah. Yeah, he's always
like it's some
this back and forth that he's going through about what he's willing to do specifically for his wife. There's a great line which is kind of maybe neither here nor there, where he's like talks about how wonderfully supportive his wife has been towards him, blamed all of his misfortunes on herself, and then he's like, yeah, there are times that she should have been like that type of woman.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's this, the ending of this book. I remember this was actually the first thing I ever read. I think it's probably far more typical that the first thing anyone has ever read is Storm of Steel. This was the first thing I had ever read, so I didn't really have like this strong impression of his personality that Storm of Steel gives. And that Storm of Steel also might give inaccurately. Like you mentioned that he went through all these edits of Storm and Steel over the
Mm-hmm.
years. And sometimes people find like there's clear political excuses to these edits. But one wonders also if there's an element of maybe he's trying to make the book more honest. Maybe he's trying to make the book reflect how he sees himself now versus how he saw himself when he wrote it before. Um, because if you approach this book from the point of view of like earlier editions of Storm of Steel, where Junger portrays himself very much as an old-fashioned man of blood, um, the sort of squeamishness that Ricard shows at a number of points
Mm-hmm.
would be very difficult to understand. Like
Yeah.
he looks at everything in the past. It's like especially this Asturian Civil War that's mentioned a number of times. Is like this messy business. Like he says in reference to the Civil War that like no one who fought in that sort of conflict could come out with clean hands. Um, so this like moral certainty perhaps about the almost goodness of conflict that seems to occur seems to be there in the earlier editions of Storm of Steel is not present at all in the Glass Bees, and it's one of the things that I think helps give um, the book its ambiguity. Though, is if you're aware of like this other version almost of Junger, it seems more surprising, both like Ricard's hesitance and also why this particular ending is here. Like why
Yeah.
is it Ricard's moral sensibility and not his military sensibility that is like the last human touch? Because the book is concerned with the idea that also the old military sensibility has completely gone away, but it sees that going away even before Zapparoni's creations ever seem to enter the scene. Like he talks about the introduction of
Right.
tanks during the First World War, and he has like this. He has this line. It's very interesting where he says the idea that like the normal way that you would die in a tank would be to be burned alive. Um, is something horrifying to him, and seems like it doesn't belong in combat somehow. Um,
Yeah.
it's like your vision is restricted. You don't really see your enemy. You just sort of like smell gunpowder and diesel and all these things. And eventually you either come out of the battlefield or you die in a fire. So you already see the technical mediating the experience of the battlefield.
Yeah.
And so Junger dies in the late 90s. He lived to be over 100. So he didn't get to see drone warfare, but you do wonder,
Yeah.
what he would feel about someone being able to be in an air conditioned room uh, on one side of the planet, controlling a predator drone hundreds or thousands of miles away.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the common theme between Storm of Steel and this is that his defense of war in Storm of Steel is about how it heightens human experience.
Yes.
All the way through it is basically his respect for the human and the human experience, most of all, right? And yeah, of course, that comes with the prospect of dying in the case of war, or perhaps he's not totally techno pessimist in Glass Bees, but in terms of a consideration of the things that you give up when you give things to technology,
Yeah.
and and I think another important thing to consider is his view of Zapparoni is that you're almost you're alienated, like you were saying about the person, the artisan who makes the glass bead, right? You're completely alienated from the worker and their product. In Zapparoni's case, right? He has this image. There's this guy you see and you feel you're very close with him, but it's very much artificial. It's this Walt Disney figure,
Yeah.
um, and in a sense, you're just you're put away from things that are made for people. They're made for people because they're made by
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, so it is interesting, like this idea of like the industrialist as saint. Um,
Hmm.
like I said, it does seem like Walt Disney is one of the models here, but Disney himself is almost like um, he's almost the most innocent model that you could come up
Yeah,
with. I mean, the version that he portrayed himself as on television is like a little more like avuncular and less irritable. It's like the rough edges of his personality have been sanded away. But in terms of like being like this dreamer who just wanted to bring like these marvelous things to life that he wished he had when he was a child, or like the extent to which Disneyland was just like really something that he wanted to exist, like
yeah,
something that he deeply fell in love with. um like Disney himself is probably like the most innocent version, yeah, that you could come up with as a model here. uh Definitely far more sinister figures have tried to like wear this suit where they portray themselves in public
yeah.
in a particular sort of way, but then do not exist that way at all in the private eye. um
Even I think there's a point where the person who makes the technology is not aware of the damages that they do, right?
yeah.
Like, I don't know, something about like the Disney millennial who, like, they go to Disney because it's like a walkable city that they can go through, and it's like this fantasy land they can enjoy. But in the meantime, they go back to their real world and they have to get in a car and they don't talk to their neighbors and so on and so forth. And people don't walk
Yeah.
around. Like, there's something deeply schizophrenic and, I don't know, for me, like aesthetically gross about that, or culturally gross about that. Um, and you think it's very much a perversion of the psyche
Yeah.
that
So
you see this wonderful world, but you're not gonna enact it actually
yeah.
around you.
Yeah. In defense of theme parks. So
I knew this was
yeah,
coming. I knew you would have a defense.
yeah. So the thing is like, yes, they are these technical marvels, like technologically mediated thing, but there's a couple aspects about them that I think is interesting. And this, I mean, like theme parks versus amusement parks. So theme parks that like try to create this like total immersive experience is that
Yeah.
there's a couple things. Like one way is like, yeah, it's a form of low art. Like video games are low art because there's like some other purpose
Hmm.
that it's being set to other than the pure thing itself. But they are kind of a total work of art. And then the other in the Wagnerian sense, where it's like we're engaging all the senses, we're like pulling out all the stops and like the different ways in which you can experience art. And then there's the sense also in which I think that they do. I think Disneyland is a great example. They do try to use the height of technology to almost make you escape beyond the technical into a different, more human realm. Um, and I think that becomes like less true now that um, theme parks have become more self-aware as being part of like a multimedia marketing
Hmm.
empire. Um, like nowadays Disney can't build an attraction unless they think it's going to be tied into like some
Star Wars.
some movie or something that they're currently doing, like the idea that they would build um attractions that have nothing in particular to do with any product that they own, like that the people could
Yeah.
just freely invent whatever they want, like that's kind of gone out the window. So like maybe some of the best things about theme parks have kind of gone away. But even then, like Universal, like I'm not a Harry Potter fan. Like it's not for me. I'm like slightly of the wrong generation, number of things. Um, but I really get what's attractive about those Universal Harry Potter parks because like they do completely like just like boom, you're like immersed in this other world in which uh
It feels very real. Yeah.
yeah, in which technical concerns are sort of pushed away into the background. Like I do think like they're reaching to something deep in the psyche for a lot of people. But you're right, like you have to integrate those realizations at some point. Like people will
Yeah.
joke about the fact that oh, I like Epcot because it's a walkable city, but then like not actually walk around their hometown. Right? Like
Yeah.
that is like an actual disconnect. But like if you're able to use those experiences to go, oh, how can I find them in my real life? It's a very different thing. But there is, speaking of
Yeah.
how I can find them in my real life, there's a very funny YouTube video that I came across uh, earlier this year, where it's a guy who was like, "Oh yeah, he's like a remote tech worker, right?" So he's like, "Yeah, I enjoy going to theme parks and I enjoy like walking around them. So I decided I would just pack up my life and move to Orlando as a single guy and just like go to Disney World every single day." And it's like, did it improve my life? And it's like, and the guy's like conclusion is yes, like I am less depressed than I used to be. And it probably is just sheerly from getting up and moving because it sounds like this guy was like never leaving his like
Yeah.
his programmer pod at all. Like he was just
Yeah.
like going like 6 p.m. time to clock out from the programmer pod and boot up my Vidya. Like
Go.
yeah, like that
Go to my soy home.
yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
does sound like what his life was. And yeah, so for someone like that, it's an enormous improvement to just have a theme park to go to every single day. But like that's not scalable. Like what do
Yeah.
you do as a solution? Um, but yeah, I think yeah, theme parks are this like interesting case to me because like they are this example of like there's like this technical facade, right? But that technical facade I feel like exists entirely for human vision. Like it exists for um ideally it exists for human vision. So I would say like to the extent that these things become more and more like a marketing element for something
Yeah.
else, like that becomes separated. But like when they exist like just for human vision, like oh, this is about like wonder or enjoyment, sparking the imagination, like bringing you back to like certain sorts of feelings or like creating certain sorts of effective experiences that you wouldn't have otherwise. Like that to me is like technology put to an end that is not
Yeah.
the technical vision.
Yeah. I would say the point of the book is not that theme parks are bad, right? But that
Yeah,
in a world where the whole world is a theme park,
yeah.
we're really not living in a good
Where everything
place.
is technical artifice, but like that technical artifice also is like forcing you to view things from the point of view of technology. Like you're viewing things
Yeah.
as things to be exploited. Like something I think about is like, oh, that's really clear evidence. And I'm not the first person to point this out about like how the technical point of view dominates. Are two particularly gross phrases that are common to modern life. Or not phrases, but nouns. Human capital and
Oh
human
yeah. Yeah.
resources. Um,
Yeah.
because like those look at people themselves as technical units that need to be exploited in particular ways.
Yeah.
Um, so like what do you, so Glassbees I think like brings up these things like not just like environmental degradation or um, the risks of technology, even though like these are these are clearly present, but the better question is like, what does it give up about, what do we give up about what makes us human in the new technical world? And how can we retain, like, what are the remaining spheres left for being human? And
Yeah.
something that I'd like to compare to theme parks, that we are guilty of on a very small scale, you and I, is the podcast. So, the podcast is like
Yeah,
clearly,
it's your friend simulator.
yeah, it's clearly this using technology for a good end. Like, you could not have these conversations and broadcast these conversations without like very advanced technology. Like, at their best, podcasts have a human end where they can spark the human imagination and like this desire to do things or engage with things beyond technology itself. Um, so my favorite podcast for a very, very long time has been The History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. I think that podcast in particular is a great achievement. Peter Adamson has been going on for a very long time at this. Like, they're somewhere in the modern era at this point after, I don't know, 10, 12 years of podcasting. But like, I don't feel like Peter Adamson is my friend. Like, I know nothing about his personality almost from that podcast. Like, it is, I mean, like, it comes out now and then when he's doing things where he has to interview people, and like, you know a little bit about his interests and his specializations come out in the podcast. But like, there's not this parasocial element where I feel like I know Peter Adamson. But there are definitely other podcasts or like podcast like content that I've engaged with where it's very, very hard to not start to see the person as like someone within your extended social sphere. Like, that creeps into
Discord.
And then the technical is actually undermining the human, because you can almost replace human connections with, like you were saying, the friend simulator. And it's the same thing. Like, that's the failure mode of theme parks. It's when you replace the idea that I can build actual community with a few times a year I will escape to the community simulator.
Yeah, it's like Miyazaki's critique of like 3D imaging and AI for rendering human-like objects, right?
So that is actually like more about, there is like, I'm not saying that he wouldn't be against generative AI, but like, it is often a little overblown. Like, the thing that he's reacting against specifically is like the fact that the human figure there is like moving in this like tormented, torturous, inhuman way. And
I think that's right. But
and he's saying like, I strongly feel this is an offense to life. Yeah,
I think that's right. But he also has a screed after that where he says it seems like we're giving up on ourselves.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be a statement about the employment of certain forms of creation that aren't like art in the sense of like drawing or like cool 3D rendering would be.
Yeah, that's how I was thinking about this, because I recently had a conversation with someone I know who's a college student, and he's really smart, diligent. Like, he's not the sort of college student that's going to like go to ChatGPT and like write me a paper on this.
Yeah.
And he'll make some changes to try to make it look like it is an AI generated and turn it in. But he's like using the AI in like almost this like maybe even like slightly more sinister way. And I told him I felt this way about what he was saying, where he's like, oh, well, like, I'm having to take this English course as a like general like degree requirement. He's a comp sci major. And rather than reading the books that I'm assigned, I get the ChatGPT to give me a plot summary and then like a
Mhm.
summary of the themes, and then like I ask it a lot of questions, and then like I ask it to compare it to these other things, and like so it's like clearly like, and then I write a paper, so it's like clearly a much different sort of inquiry, but it's still like, oh well, now I have a substitute for doing the
Yeah.
reading and engaging with this thing. I can like create like this super secondary literature that like primes me for engaging with
I
the
could
book.
talk to someone who knows a lot about this book. Yeah.
Yeah. And but like these things are genuinely useful for research. Like I can, if I have a thorny question, I can throw it into Gemini research mode and I can get a number of links relevant to what I'm talking about. Like I recently had a conversation with someone else about maybe doing my appearing on a podcast talking about theories of contract law.
Hmm.
And I was like, I'm not up to date at all on what the legal scholarship is about smart contracts. Because like that was the idea of interest was how classical theories of contract law might interact with the idea of smart contracts. And I was like, okay, so what is the current state of scholarship here? And I just like sent Gemini loose on the question and then came up with like about a dozen papers for me to read
Hmm.
on smart contracts right now. Um, so I've been working through those. And like it would have taken me probably like 4 to 5 hours of research to turn up most of those papers. And I probably wouldn't have
Right.
turned up all of them. Or I would have had access to a research library to help me out.
Hmm.
And instead, I turn on research mode. I ask the question. I spend a few minutes editing the outline of the research that Gemini is going to embark on. And then I press a button. I say, hey, start doing research. I go off and do something else. And then 30 to 45 minutes later, there's like a massive outline and a list of like 20 to 40 sources waiting for
Yeah.
me. Um, so it's clearly a wonderful tool that can actually deepen your experience of doing the reading. Um, like I thought about how easy it would be um, to do to do something like this podcast actually, and I'm not even kidding, without ever having read the book. Like you really could just sort of like skim an outline of the Glass Bees, like maybe read
Yeah.
like one piece of secondary literature on it, and then like write up something and like say, hey, compare the Glass Bees with like these two philosophical ideas, spit out an outline, and then just like riff from that. Like you could really reduce yourself away from like the human element of encountering literature. But then I think you remove what I think of as the moral element of literature. And that's actually something I want to get to. I didn't think about this ahead of time as something I wanted to talk
Hmm.
about, but it's something that I now that we're here, I do want to talk about. Is that one of the great things I think about novels is that novels are actually a sphere for moral training. Um, so this happens in a few different ways. It's like one is that you encounter situations that you'd never encounter in real life, and
Yeah. You're
you have to
simulating
think
with your
yeah,
mind.
you have to think through them. The other is that they give you access to other minds from their own internal
Hmm.
point of view. And I mean, like, yes, that's a simulation of another mind, but it actually really does, I think, create this capacity to build, like, great novels create this capacity to build sympathy for other minds. And I think that's a
Sure.
very important human trait. Like, I always, when I interact with someone who seems very incapable of appreciating how another mind might work, like, it does feel like someone is like lacking a particularly useful human capacity.
Yeah.
And it becomes like very hard to talk to them. And that is something that novels do. It's like you encounter these other people, and it can also because of that, it can also reshape how you see events in your own life. And then there's another way that novels work as moral teachers, where they actually serve as engines of moral judgment, which is they present they present persons and actions towards you, and part of the aesthetic experience of the novel is actually coming to correct moral judgments about what's occurring in the novel. Um,
Hmm.
and so, like, there are all these things that are going on in novels that I think are beyond just like mere appreciation of the prose, and are definitely beyond like mere, like, oh, I'm enjoying the plot of this novel. Like, I think that truly great novels, they have great prose, they have interesting plots. Like, Glass Bees is a good example. Like, the plot is relatively thin. It doesn't have to have a lot of action to be a great novel. But I do think
Hmm.
to elevate it to greatness, there does have to be this element of moral formation on some level, of like creating, of broadening moral sympathy.
Sure.
Um, like or just like broadening the sphere of like where we see virtue acting in lives. Um, like, a mutual of mine on Twitter recently had a great tweet about like one of the things that stands out about Jane Austen's novels is that she treats uh, selecting a spouse as this like a fantastic arena for the exercise of virtue. It's like, this is actually, no, this is one of the most important things that you will do in your life. And can you do this virtuously and correctly? Um, and I think that's very true about her novels. And I think in her best novels, the protagonist has to learn virtue in a very clear way,
Yeah.
has to overcome her flaws in order to act virtuously in this particular selection. Um, and that can be pretty obvious. I think it's very obvious how that works in Emma. But in something like Pride and Prejudice, it's maybe a little more subtle to most people. Um, but yeah, so like the novel as a form of moral formation, like the novel is this is why I don't think that there's a clear division between literature or poetry and philosophy at all the times, because I do think that when these things are operating correctly, that they do have this formative element to them. Um, so, like, that's very
Yeah.
obvious in a book like The Glass Bees, which is clearly deeply meditating on the human relationship to technology. But I also think that's true about great novels in general, is that they do have like this element of moral formation.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I wrote a paper on this last year called "Myth is Model," trying to understand, in the same way that something like an agent-based model or computer simulation, right, is like a generative model of the world where you can look at possible futures. We should also think about stories in the same way as sort of magnets for moral attention or for norm attention, right? Um, in a case where a society has shared stories, it's kind of an attractor basin for positioning people's moral worldviews in kind of the same place. And so that's really interesting to think about from the perspective of the novelist, right? The novelist doesn't necessarily know that what they're doing is painting a moral picture per se, But when you think about what is fiction simulation in general for like any individual person, it tends to be as that sort of tool, right, for thinking through possible futures or ways of dealing with situations I haven't seen before, so that in the future, if I come across a situation like this, I will therefore act accordingly. And so, on the part of the novelist, right, they're doing that on their own.
Yeah.
But it just kind of speaks to the power of what books are, right, in that coming out of the individual mind, creating this kind of moral or humanistic human simulation, you could effectively put that on other people's heads.
I mean, it can also reshape.
It's kind of a reason to read the classics,
Yeah.
you know. Um,
I think it also, it's like, it doesn't just prepare you for the future. I think it can also help improve your narrative of the past.
yeah,
Or improve like your relationship with your own past. Like I've
yeah.
definitely had the experience reading a novel where there was something about a character in the novel that reminded me deeply of someone that I knew. And I suddenly realized like these like negative feelings that I had towards this person, um, in large part came from overly privileging my own point of view as to what they were doing versus their own. It doesn't mean that what this person did was like morally excusable or anything, but like this like deep feeling of offense that I had was in some ways unwarranted because it wasn't really about me. It was about these people dealing with their own demons more than it was
Mm-hmm.
anything to do with me ever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in that way, like I mean, like there's one instance where a book actually had like this effect on me very very profoundly, and I was like finally able to like come away at peace with like something that had really been gnawing at me for 15 years at that point. Um, but that is the thing. It's like, okay, well we have these other human technologies. We have art, we have poetry, um, we have these other ways of knowing, and I can point to the way that these ways of knowing, these other human ways of knowing, have improved my life. Like I can point to the material benefit of engaging in art or music, or poetry for myself, like either creating it or consuming it. But it's so hard to do this on a societal level. It's very very hard to
Yeah.
measure uh, what is life like in a world where people seriously engage with these ways of knowing, and what is life like when people do not. Like there's not an easy metric. There's all, like that's one of the things is like technology is the world of metrics. So in order to like ask, all right, well what's the metric for the value of the arts, philosophy, poetry as ways of knowing, um, already puts them on the grounds of technology. And of course, when you're on the grounds of technology, you're never going to measure up uh,
Mm-hmm.
to technology itself. Um, and yeah, it's very difficult in a world that privileges like these sorts of results. I do think, yeah, you continually come back around um, to this issue of like how do you defend these things in the face of the privileging of the technological point of view. And so that actually seems to
Mm-hmm.
me to be the big difference is like, what is the difference between the world that he talks about in one passage where he talks about, oh, this person would have been so much happier if they were living in the village and was doing a hard day's work in the field, and then
Right.
came home and had a mug of beer and enjoyed their life by the fireside or whatever. Like, you'd say, but oh, like let's go beyond the simple objection of like, well, people were poor then, and like live shorter lives or whatever. Um, you could say, well, his life is still mediated by technology. Like his life is mediated by the plow and by the house that that has been built, and all these other objects. Um, but I think no, there is a crucial turning point, and the crucial turning point is not a technical turning point. It is actually a human turning point, and that crucial turning point is when the technical point of view begins to be so privileged that it crowds out all other
Right.
points of view.
Right.
And I mean, that's what the book is about for me, is Junger seeing that was already happening. Like in some ways, like, I mean, he was very aware, like he was already involved in this let's get back to pre-technological civilization movement even before the First World War. So that change had already been worked in almost to Western civilization, and it's only become more and more pervasive as
Yeah.
our lives become more and more technically mediated. Like I've got this damn thing with me all the time.
I mean, I'm talking to you on a computer.
Yeah. Or I mean, like,
We met on a computer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Also, like the theme park thing. I've seen this so many times. You see this. It's not just at theme parks. You see this at concerts. You see this everywhere now. It's like people are filming
Oh, right.
everything
Yeah.
that happens to them. Like they're like, it's like you can't experience anything directly at any point. Like you can only experience it as if you are an observer creating content of your own life. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, you could say, oh, okay, like what's the difference between that and photography? And it's like, well, the difference is in photography, if you're like doing it in this like not purely documentary sense, is you're looking at the lived environment and you're going, what is the artistic tableau? Like, what is the
Yeah.
new way of
You're
looking at this? Like, what is different rather than the documentarian? It's like, oh, I'm filming content. Like, I've got to ship this to Instagram. I've got to ship this to Facebook. Like, you're already anticipating the observer rather than yourself as the observer. It's like
yeah.
your model in some way is like, all right, I am now like the observer in my head is observing this thing on my phone so that I can use this rather than like the direct contact
Yeah.
with the thing. And that's what I worry about also with LLMs, is that like that becomes the filter, the new filter by which you experience things is the LLM itself. And I think about this in relation to smart glasses. Like a lot of people are very bullish on the idea of like, oh, like, well, you could have these glasses that you wear that then like tie into the LLM and then like give you useful information about your environment. And then it's like, once again, I feel like, well, then I'm no longer observing things. I'm sort of like observing the LLM's interpretation of my
Yeah.
environment at that point. And I start to get this sort of like nausea when I contemplate this as a technology, and I just know I'm never going to wear the glasses.
There's already like a generative AI camera.
Yeah.
It has no viewfinder or anything like that, and it actually has no screen. It's that effectively you just capture what's in front of you, and then purports to make a better version of it.
Yeah.
Which is like kind of interesting because it's a bit avant-garde in a certain way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I almost respect that more than.
Well, yeah. I also think about the idea that smart glasses, like I was actually thinking about the smart glasses issue while I was reading this book. And I thought about it in relation to like the moment where there's that passage that was like, oh yeah, Zapparoni is Walt Disney, at least in part. Was that the smart glasses, like, you know, with sufficient compute, right? Which is always the question. But I tend to believe that sufficient compute will always eventually be found. You can imagine a world in which like you put on the smart glasses and then it just changes your lived environment into
Yeah.
something better than what it actually is. Like you're able to like turn like I take a walk pretty much every day on a trail, and it's like just like a bunch of edge habitat near office buildings, with like a little bit of swamp. Like Cody's been on the trail, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing impressive about this scenery. There's like a bunch of power lines, there's overpasses, etc. But still, like I've managed to find art in this particular scenery. Like I have photographs of this scenery that I actually really, really like and that I think work well as photographs. But I could certainly imagine a day in which I could just put on the glasses and I could turn my daily walk into its own Disneyland rather
Yeah,
than
you're walking
what it
through the
is. And
Shire.
I
Yeah.
would no longer like have this opportunity to try to turn the mundane into art. I would rather get
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
super mundane at all times.
Yeah, I mean that's the point about photography, right?
Yeah.
You're pulling the exceptional out of the
Yeah.
ordinary. That's what you're doing. You're not documenting things as is.
Yeah.
You can take wonderful photography in the most boring places.
Right.
That's not what people are doing at
Yeah,
concerts.
yeah. If the light and shadow is correct, yeah. Like yeah, I think about this too a lot with regards to event photography. Like I feel like most events would be best captured in like 4 to 10 excellent artistic shots of the event rather than what you normally get now, which is kind of like dozens to hundreds of very mundane documentary photos of
Or
every
yeah,
stage of it.
or like what you've said, I think in a previous episode about wedding
Yeah,
photography. It's yeah, you end up with like a simulacrum rather than
yeah,
actually getting a view of the thing.
yeah. So I think this is actually, and like that's what disturbs me about the technical point of view is that it does reduce everything to the simulation of what it is.
Yeah.
And then there's another element too that like Junger could not have foreseen, which is even though like he does kind of talk about it in like I guess like he does foresee it, but he foresees it in a different way. He sees it as the technical crowding out directly the human element in cinema. It's like it's just completely replacing the actors. It's completely um, replacing all the sort of hard to control variables of the human. But like what's actually happened is like we don't replace actors and we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
replace writers. What we instead do is we create this world in which film itself is so productized that the film begins to feel like a simulacrum of film rather than
Yeah.
a film itself. Like I had this,
Yeah. Marvel slop.
yeah, I had this moment very, very strongly seeing the very first Avengers movie, which is like when
Yeah.
most people think that Marvel movies were still good. But I had
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
sense like watching the big final battle in that where it's like nothing spatially made sense. Like there was no sense of anything being grounded. There was just like this sense of like, oh, like wouldn't it be cool if, and then they just make the next scene the next cool thing to happen. Like it doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense with like the terrain or what was happening or where the characters were previously positioned or anything. It's like the
Yeah.
idea of film becoming like in some way representing something real or transporting you to a different world was instead completely replaced with the idea of like what is going to keep the audience's attention in the most like lowest common denominator way possible.
Yeah.
Like how do we just like
Yeah. I mean, Marvel
yeah,
Marvel movies effectively take place in an open plain. Like
yeah,
that's probably the best way of describing it.
yeah. So I just had this like yeah, feeling of horror. And it was a long time before I ever saw another Marvel movie after that. And every time I've seen one since that, I kind of regret the entire experience. It was like, oh yes, I was right about these things all along. Like they have not become any better.
But so many movies are like that now. I mean,
Yeah,
I watched like the Beetlejuice, the second one, and it was like everything about the sets, like it didn't feel like you were actually in a
yeah.
place. Again,
Well, I'm fine with that.
it was
Like,
like some
yeah,
slapstick comedians got
yeah.
together and
I
like,
do
oh, and then
like
what if this happened?
artifice in movies. Like, provided that artifice like feels artistic and like also feels like
Yeah.
somehow grounded. Like, I recently rewatched Wes Anderson's The Life Aquatic, which is like usually considered
Hmm.
one of his weaker movies. One of the things I really like about that is like the giant ship cutaway ship set. And like, yeah, it feels completely fake. It feels like something out of a children's book illustration brought to life. But like, I think that's actually,
That's kind of the
yeah,
point.
that's right. That is the point. Like, it is like, and it's charming, but also like the action within that makes sense. Like, there's no point at which like people don't get magically transported around the boat in ways that don't make sense. Like, it tries to remain true to its own, you know, not real version of reality. Um,
Yeah.
and I think this is like the downside of CGI is CGI has freed people up completely from the idea that they have to make what they're doing grounded. But it hasn't
Yeah.
freed them up in such a way that they actually just make like good freakish animation either. Like they don't go to the end of trying to use that creativity very often to do something that like you couldn't do without CGI. It's usually like trying to do normal movie making, but somehow
Yeah.
worse.
It comes back to this point about, the construction of cathedrals.
Yeah.
It's like, if you have this new tool, don't make the old thing.
Yeah.
Like find where the new limit is.
Yeah.
When it comes to using these tools and human creativity, but it's just so pale when you're just recreating what already was
Yeah.
and was done, you know, more artistically or artisanally, I guess, using other
Yeah.
means. Like you could remake the Dark Crystal in about 11 seconds using CGI, but it would be like the flattest movie you've ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah, the
Um,
tactile nature of the puppets in movies like that makes a big difference. Um,
yeah,
I mean, like that's also true with um, things like science fiction, where it's like things used to take place in grounded sets, and now like so much of that is filled in with green screen that it creates like this unreality without actually like going all the way and doing something that you couldn't shoot using normal methods. Um,
yeah. I mean, the Alien movie looks better than any of its sequels.
yeah,
Like,
I mean, I think that's like often true with this stuff that things do age better when they're made by people. But like, and I think there's also like this. There's a decline of the artisan nature
mm,
of Hollywood when you look at watch behind the scenes stuff from like old special effects spectaculars, like the amount of like care and pride that these people took in like the small parts of their work, versus like you've got some room of dozens of animators who are kind of like each such a small part of the process that they don't have any sort of intimate connection with it anymore. I do think that creates a different relationship. um,
although, like a movie like Interstellar, right, where they rendered that black hole and it took
yeah,
how many hundreds of people to do it. Again, that was the thing pushing the limits. Like,
yeah,
yeah, you weren't going to be able to visualize a black hole um, except using this piece of
right.
technology,
And
right? Like
that's
Nolan
also
actually,
a movie where Nolan intentionally though did try to use practical effects and camera work.
yeah,
Like he tried to do
Yeah,
as
I mean,
much
I
in
thought
camera work as possible.
yeah, and I thought for like Oppenheimer, he was going to blow up a nuke.
Yeah.
And he did use practical effects for the bomb in it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, once again, it's not like people aren't still creating art, but there is something about like, okay, well, you can also take the technical approach to art, which is how do I like streamline this process? How do I turn this into an object for easy production, replicability, and like make it also part of
Yeah,
some multimedia push as well? Like how do I maximize it by like finding tie-ins, or like how do I, there's someone, it's been a long time ago, but like I thought about this. I was having a conversation with someone, and like I was like, something that I really resent is uh the degree of which now there's sort of like a monoculture about certain things, which is if you like this thing, you're supposed to also like all these other things.
yeah,
It's kind of like how no one, you don't meet someone who's like just a Star Wars fan anymore. Like, yeah, they're like a Star Wars, Harry Potter, Marvel, etc. fan. It's like they just love all the things. It's like there's no such thing as like, oh, I like pick like to the same degree anymore. It's like people pick out a couple of things and they're like incredibly possessive about like these these things, like in a way that's almost
wait, the
admirable.
boundaries. Yeah,
Yeah, now you just kind of like are supposed to generally like everything.
yeah. It's like it's actually like they painted the comic book guy from The Simpsons as like this like horrific snob
Yeah.
when it's actually like no, like we like definitely need people like that
Yeah.
to like police the art. you know, um, Yeah, one thing I would add to this, and this relationship of technology to art and aesthetics, is that Thomas Kuhn actually talks about this in his Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he's like, it's horrible this premise that science just increases through better means of technology or better methodologies rather than via creative practice. He's like, could you imagine if aesthetics um, were produced that way, if it was just like about like finding and creating and refining better tools
Yeah.
for making things more, and it's like, yo, we're here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what's happened.
That happened.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap this up for now. Definitely,
Sure.
maybe at some point it's worth actually then considering Heidegger's version of Jung is considering the question concerning
Mm.
technology. But I think the
Oh, I
next,
would love to read that.
yeah, but I think the next thing we'll do, hopefully, I think the next thing we'll do is Aristotle's physics. We've talked
Yeah, I
about that a
think that's
couple
right.
times. So hopefully in a couple of weeks, week or two, Cody and I will meet back to talk about that. And thank you for listening. Like I've said before, if you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe there. That does help out. Otherwise, uh, we're at horizonsreview.substack.com. You can subscribe there. There are also some blog posts, and I'll see you in the next episode.